Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recording. Now, this one has, well, I keep saying, oh, this one's really interesting. Well, this one is really, really interesting. It's Dvořák's New World Symphony, a symphony number 9. And this reference recording has really required a lot of thought because at the time when the consensus was evolving in the 50s and 60s for what reference recordings were, when there were enough people listening to them, enough people buying them, enough recordings being made, Dvořák was in a very interesting position because for most people in outside of the Czech lands, Dvořák was a rather minor composer who wrote a few important works. The New World Symphony was far and away the most important of all of them. And it was the only thing that most conductors conducted, not necessarily even recorded, but they played it, they conducted it, and that was the thing that Dvořák was. I mean, he was the New World Symphony, an occasional Slavonic dance, maybe a chamber work for people who are into chamber music, but very, very little else. And so in coming up with the reference recording, we have to keep in mind that it was not going to be a version by anyone who was really specializing in playing Dvořák. I mean, George Szell was kind of unusual in really playing Dvořák quite frequently, the last 3 symphonies, for example. But his is not the reference recording. I mean, it's another question entirely. We'll get to that in a minute. Dvořák was, of course, the major figure in Czech music in the Czech lands, but the superphone recordings of Dvořák weren't available here. They were virtually impossible to get your hands on. And so in coming up with the reference recording, I really had to go back and look at what was available and think about what I knew of what people bought, what people had, what people talked about, what the critics talked about, what they reviewed. Really, really fascinating. In fact, going back to, remember Howard Taubman, our book in Building a Record Collection in 1953, I think this was, or 52 or something like that. I was looking at this, and they do have Dvořák, of course. Dvořák, Symphony number 4. Now, that was the extra list. Let's go to the normal list of basic stuff, or orchestral music. So the Symphony number 4, by the way, was Symphony number 8, in case you're curious. Dvořák, Symphony number 5, New World Symphony. They had Szell and Columbia as their choice. But Szell and Columbia was not available anywhere else in the world, as far as I could tell. I mean, it's kind of interesting. This was in, 51, I think, right? Let's see here. Was 53. Okay. Copyright 1953. So the recordings would have been available a little bit earlier than that. So that was, and even then, Szell was pretty recent on Columbia. So Cat wants to play fetch. Just relax. We'll get to that. It's okay, Mildred. Anyway, so what then is the reference? Because you couldn't expect people in Europe to be rushing out to get mono Szell Columbia recordings, even if they had licensing arrangements with other European labels. Let me just put that away. The recording, which is the reference, was Toscanini. Believe it or not, yes, it was Toscanini. Because, well, first of all, this was recorded in 1953. So there you go. It's a little bit around the same time or a little bit later than George Szell, which is kind of interesting. It was very late, Toscanini. A very exciting performance. Swift and rhythmically taught, as Toscanini almost always was, but not inflexible, as some people claim late Toscanini always was. He wasn't always. And wonderfully played and very well recorded for its day. So I remember we had this one. And I'm not saying that because, my mom had it. My mom had it. But lots of other people I know had it. And when I was talking to my friends and colleagues, and when we were thinking about what would it have been Now, the Dvořák explosion happened somewhat after there, and people started recording everything, and New World Symphonies came. If you lived in the United States and you had Eugene Ormandy in Philadelphia, that would have been your reference. Eugene Ormandy, of course, later remade it with the London Symphony. It was like his only major recording not done in Philadelphia, and that was a big deal. Or there was Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, and his single symphonic recording wasn't the Boston Pops, as you've all told me. It was the Boston Symphony. Very good performance. But this was in 53. And in 53, Toscanini was the reference artist. Remember, if he did something, it automatically became the reference recording because it was Toscanini, and it was, a big deal. People bought Toscanini because it was Toscanini. And RCA marketed the bejesus out of him. He was pushed. He was promoted. He was available. He had the international reputation. It's hard to think of another conductor who could have done the New World Symphony who would have been as popular or as highly respected as a reference. You could always say, well, I like this performance better or that performance better, but Toscanini did it. And if Toscanini did it, it meant something. Remember, Toscanini was a contemporary of Dvořák. He played the symphonic variations in 1897, I think he started playing Dvořák. Dvořák wrote him a letter thanking him for playing his stuff. He did the New World Symphony a few times when it was brand new. It's kind of amazing what the provenance is, how it goes back to the 1890s. But in the 1890s, Toscanini was already in his 30s, 40s, his 30s, pushing. He was born in 1860 something. So yeah. Toscanini was already a mature artist, and Dvořák was an older master, and there was a connection, which is fascinating to me. Anyway, the bottom line is this 1953 New World Symphony was a big deal in the New World discography, and it became, for most people, the reference recording almost by default. Really, really interesting. And it was only later with Czech recordings started to become available and Czech artists and Czech things. And then we started thinking about Dvořák in a broader sense. Actually, a later conductor who really gave Dvořák a certain amount of credibility was Karajan, because he did the Eighth Symphony. That was the one he really loved. His New World Symphony was never anything special, but his Eighth was fabulous. And he recorded it 3 or 4 times, like he did everything 3 or 4 times. Bernstein did the Seventh, and then a sensational New World Symphony. Bruno Walter did the New World Symphony. Everyone was doing the New World Symphony at one point or another. But the Toscanini was the reference, and everything else was a reflection on that. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.